something happened that nobody in Washington wanted to admit was coming. The 60-day deadline expired. The deal that was supposed to end the war between America and Iran, the Memorandum of Understanding that both sides signed back in June, has now officially run out of time. And there is no deal. There is no agreement. There is no peace. What there is instead is a 24-week-old war that has no exit, a Strait of Hormuz that is still blocked, oil markets that are bleeding, sailors who have been at sea for 9 months, and a president who is now threatening to bomb Oman, a neutral country that has been trying to broker peace. I want you to let that sink in for a moment. America is threatening to bomb the one country in the region that has been quietly working to end this war diplomatically. That is where we are today, and today I am going to walk you through exactly how we got here, what it means for the next few weeks, and why the situation that is developing right now may be the most dangerous moment of this entire conflict. Stay with me, because every single thing I am about to tell you is happening right now. Let us start from the beginning of what just happened. Back in June, after months of fighting, ceasefires that kept breaking down, and massive economic damage, America and Iran signed what was called a Memorandum of Understanding. Both sides agreed to stop major strikes. Both sides agreed to negotiate. And most importantly, they gave themselves 60 days to reach a final deal. That deal was supposed to cover 2 enormous things. First, the future management of the Strait of Hormuz, which is the narrow waterway that carries 20% of the world's oil supply. Second, the future of Iran's nuclear program and what sanctions relief Iran would receive in exchange for limiting it. 60 days. That was the window. And in those 60 days, what happened? Multiple ceasefire violations. Iran rejecting how ships were choosing to move through the strait. America responding with new strikes. GPS spoofing, where navigation systems are interfered with to confuse ships about their location, becoming a regular weapon in the Hormuz conflict. Oil tankers being hit. And today, the 60 days ended, with nothing agreed. With both countries still deadlocked, and with Trump threatening a country that was trying to help. Now let me explain the Oman situation, because this is the part of today's story that is genuinely shocking, and that most people are not fully understanding. Oman has been the quiet diplomat in this conflict from the very beginning. They share a coastline with the Strait of Hormuz. They have historically good relationships with both Iran and the United States. And for months, Omani diplomats have been traveling back and forth, carrying messages, building frameworks, trying to find language that both sides could accept. They were the ones facilitating the Hormuz shipping negotiations. And today, Iran's foreign ministry announced that Tehran had reached its own separate agreement with Oman regarding future shipping routes through the strait. This was a significant diplomatic development. Iran and Oman, without American approval, agreed on how commercial shipping should be managed through the waterway. And Trump's response? He went on Fox News and threatened to bomb Oman if the country, and I am quoting directly, gets in the way of American efforts to reopen the strait. Think about what just happened. The one country that has been working hardest to broker peace, the neutral diplomat that everyone in the region trusted, just got threatened by the same country it was trying to help. And you want to know what the consequence of that threat is going to be? Every neutral country watching this conflict is now taking notes. If America threatens to bomb its friends when they try to help, then there are no neutral parties left. There are no mediators. There are no quiet diplomats. There is only war, and the isolation of the United States from everyone who might have helped it find a way out. Now let us talk about what the Strait of Hormuz actually looks like right now, because the numbers tell a story that no speech or social media post can cover up. Before this war began, an average of 110 ships passed through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. 110 ships carrying oil, gas, cargo, everything that the modern global economy needs to function. Today, in the last 24 hours, 3 commercial ships passed through that waterway. 3 from 110 to 3. And even those 3 ships are taking enormous risks. Iran has been targeting vessels it considers non-compliant with its rules. American forces have been redirecting ships, boarding others, and confronting Iranian patrol boats. The U.S. military reported this week that CENTCOM forces have redirected 64 commercial vessels, disabled 3, and boarded 2 in enforcement operations. That is not a functioning global trade route. That is a military checkpoint in the middle of the ocean. And the global economy is paying the price every single day it stays that way. What does that look like in practice? Oil prices are significantly higher than they were before this conflict began. Global oil stockpiles are dwindling according to the International Energy Agency. Countries that depend on Gulf oil, Japan, South Korea, India, large parts of Europe, are burning through their emergency reserves. Some of them are now making long-term deals to buy oil from other sources at much higher prices, which locks in economic pain for years to come. And the longer the Hormuz deal fails to close, the more permanent that damage becomes. Because when businesses and governments start making alternative arrangements, they do not simply reverse them when the strait reopens. The economic relationships change, the trade routes change. And America, the country whose currency, whose bonds, and whose global credibility depend on being seen as a reliable and stable partner, looks less reliable and less stable every single week this drags on. There is one more thing I want to cover in Part 1 before we go deeper in Part 2. And that is the story of what Jared Kushner was doing today while the Iran deal deadline was expiring. Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor was in Israel, meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. This was the day after Kushner held talks with Hamas leaders in Egypt to discuss an American-backed ceasefire proposal for Gaza, a proposal that Israel has already rejected. So on the day that the most important diplomatic deadline of this war expired, with no deal, with Trump threatening Oman, with oil markets shaken, the most senior American diplomat in the region was in Israel talking about a different conflict entirely. What does that tell you? It tells you that the people running American foreign policy right now are juggling more crises than they can manage. It tells you that the attention, the focus, and the energy that should be going into solving the Hormuz crisis is being split across Gaza, Lebanon, and now potentially Oman. And it tells you that Iran, which has been extraordinarily patient and methodical throughout this entire conflict, has correctly identified that America is overextended, underarmed, and domestically exhausted, and they are simply waiting for the pressure to build so high that Washington has no choice but to accept terms that look far less like victory and far more like compromise. That moment is getting closer every single day. And in Part 2, I am going to show you exactly what those terms might look like, why Trump cannot accept them politically, and what happens if this conflict enters its 7th month with no deal, no weapon stockpile, no allies, and no off-ramp in sight. Subscribe and come back immediately, because Part 2 is where everything you need to understand about where this is going is laid out completely. If you watched Part 1, you know that today the 60-day deadline to end the US-Iran war expired with no deal. You know that Trump threatened to bomb Oman, the one neutral country helping broker peace. You know that the Strait of Hormuz has gone from 110 ships a day to 3 ships a day. And you know that Jared Kushner was in Israel today, focused on Gaza, while the most important deadline of this entire war came and went without resolution. But here is what I did not get to tell you in Part 1. Here's the part that should concern every single person watching this, not just as a geopolitical story, but as a story about what happens to the world when the most powerful country in it runs out of options and refuses to admit it. Welcome to Part 2. And this is where everything becomes clear. Let us start with the weapons. Because without understanding the weapon situation, nothing else about this conflict makes sense. America entered this war in February with what looked like overwhelming firepower, and in the first 39 days alone, American forces hit over 13,000 targets in Iran. Tomahawk missiles, JASSM strikes, THAAD interceptors, Patriot batteries, the full arsenal of American military technology deployed at a pace the world had not seen since the Gulf War. And it worked, in the sense that the strikes were accurate, the damage was real, and Iran suffered significant losses. But here's the number that the Pentagon does not want you to focus on. America has now burned through nearly 80% of its THAAD ballistic missile interceptors. Fewer than 278 Theta-IAD interceptors remain in U.S. stockpiles. Fewer than 827 Patriot interceptors. The Army has used most of its supply of Army tactical missile systems and precision strike missiles. And analysts from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, one of the most respected defense think tanks in Washington, say it could take years to rebuild those stockpiles. Not months, years, because the factories that make these weapons cannot simply double output overnight. The supply chains are long, the specialized components are difficult to source, and the lead time for producing high-end munitions like Patriot missiles is measured in years, not weeks. Now here is why that matters so much today specifically. Because today the 60-day ceasefire deal expired, which means the formal agreement that was supposed to keep both sides from launching major strikes is no longer in force, which means Iran, which has 75% of its missile and drone capabilities still intact according to its own military commanders, is no longer bound by the same diplomatic constraints it was under yesterday. America's weapons are running low, Iran's weapons are largely untouched, and the agreement that was supposed to bridge that gap has just expired with nothing to replace it. If Trump decides to launch a new major strike campaign against Iran, and he has threatened to do exactly that, he will be doing it with a critically depleted arsenal, against an opponent that has been carefully conserving its firepower for exactly this moment. That is not a position of strength. That is a position of genuine strategic danger, and Iran knows it. The Iranian strategy throughout this conflict has been remarkable in its patience and its clarity. A senior advisor to the commander of Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps said it openly in a PBS interview. Iran's goal is to prolong this war until Trump is out of office, not to defeat America on the battlefield, not to humiliate the U.S. military, simply to outlast one administration, to make the cost of continuing too high and the cost of stopping too politically painful for Trump to absorb, until eventually a different American leadership has to deal with the consequences. That is a cold, calculated, and, it has to be said, increasingly effective strategy. Every week that passes without a deal is a week Iran survives. Every ceasefire violation that does not lead to a decisive American response teaches Iran that the red lines are not as firm as they look. Every diplomat that America threatens, including Oman today, pushes potential mediators away and narrows the space for a negotiated exit. Iran is not in a rush. America is. Now let us talk about what a deal could actually look like, because despite everything, negotiations are still technically ongoing. Oman and Iran reached their own framework agreement today on shipping through the Hormuz Strait. Iran's position is that it should have meaningful authority over which vessels transit the waterway and under what conditions. That is a significant demand. Before this war, the Strait of Hormuz was considered international waters, open to all vessels under the principles of freedom of navigation. If Iran succeeds in establishing any kind of formal veto power over who passes through the strait, it is a fundamental shift in how one of the world's most critical trade routes operates. And that is exactly why Trump cannot easily accept it politically, because accepting it looks like surrendering control of a waterway that America went to war to keep open, and surrendering control after 6 months of fighting, after burning through most of your missile defense stockpile, after losing the support of most of the region. That is not how any American president, especially this one, wants to be remembered. But the alternative is also deeply difficult, launching a new major strike campaign with depleted weapons against an opponent that still has most of its firepower. Threatening the neutral diplomats who might help you find an exit. Watching global oil prices rise further while stockpiles drain. And doing all of this while your sailors have been at sea for 9 months. Your weapons factories cannot keep up with your consumption, and the entire Sunni Arab world is reassessing whether America is still the power it once was. There's no clean option here. Every path forward has a cost, and the longer Washington waits to make a decision, any decision, the higher all of those costs become. Here's the final thing I want to leave you with. History has a pattern when great powers get stuck in wars they cannot win and cannot exit. The pattern is that the war does not end quickly. It ends slowly and painfully, with costs that accumulate over time until the political and economic pressure becomes impossible to ignore. Vietnam lasted years past the point where American military commanders knew the original objectives were unachievable. The lesson from that conflict, and from others like it, is that the longer you wait to adjust your strategy to reality, the more expensive the adjustment becomes. America is now in month 6 of a war it expected to last 2 weeks. It has burned through most of its critical weapons stockpile. Its regional alliances are fracturing. Its neutral partners are being threatened. And the 60-day agreement that was supposed to produce peace has expired today with nothing to show for it. The deal is not dead yet. Negotiations can still resume. But today marks a turning point. Because when deadlines expire without consequence, they stop being deadlines. And when America threatens the mediators it stops having mediators. And when that happens, the only thing left is the war itself. And this war has already gone on 6 months longer than anyone planned. Comment below here as a thought. Do you think a deal is still possible? Or has this gone too far to come back from? Subscribe, because this situation is changing every single day, and I will be here to break it all down for you.